how are we starting this? How are we going to sally forth into?
Oh,
You. Humanity's best weapon. Master Chief, huh?
Feel like a Master Chief.
Do you think it's bad that I actually had a shred of optimism? That I was
no.
that I actually thought maybe I need to stop being a boomer millennial and just take off my rose-tinted glasses of Halo 1 through 3 and give this show a fair shot.
I think that's healthy. I think too much cynicism. I think if you're going into things like this and you're just like, you know what? The odds aren't good, but I'd rather have some hope. I think it's important.
Give the Covenant back their bomb. All right. Hey, folks. How's it going? Tom and I are here sharing the same microphone in the same room. Tom actually moved here not too long ago. And we also suffered the first episode of the Halo series on the hit streaming platform, quote unquote, Paramount Plus.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's something that we have some opinions about because it was interesting.
Yeah, it was I feel like there's two conversations to have here, or two aspects to this conversation. One is how this show works as an adaptation of Halo, and second, how it works as like a narrative in and of itself.
We grew up with Halo.
Yeah. That was like a defining cultural milestone for the early 2000s was the launch of the Xbox and Halo 1, and Halo 2 was a phenomenon. That was an event.
That was the first time I went to a GameStop and actually stood outside to pick up my pre-order at night and wrap around the building.
Yeah.
My Mountain Dew Code Red, I was pumped. No, it can't be stated enough how much of an impact that Halo left on gaming, and we still feel those effects to this day. I mean, the legacy itself, I feel like has been weighed down a bit by the releases of Halo 5 and Infinite is not nearly as bad as 5. I mean, I wouldn't have played it yet, but it seems that it's still been handled poorly as far as you mentioned yesterday, they haven't released co-op yet, or
yeah, there's still no campaign co-op or Forge. At least at time of recording. Who knows? Maybe they'll drop it tomorrow.
Glaring issue. So, not to get off topic because this is about the show, but Halo 1 through 3. One of the most masterful gaming trilogies ever made. I really can't think of another. I mean, is there another trilogy you can think of that comes close to it as far as a complete story?
In terms of the cultural impact, or just the
I guess multiple. Let's take out our scorecards as far as the story was satisfying.
Yeah. I mean, Halo was the complete package. I mean, it pioneered console first-person shooter multiplayer. It pioneered online multiplayer on console. The stuff they did in Halo 2 really set the bar and solidified the Xbox Live model as console multiplayer, but even just as a campaign, twin stick shooting on console was something that was not very common. Before Halo 1 launched, the kind of general consensus was that if you want to play a first-person shooter, you have to play it on PC. No one had really cracked the code for that. We had obviously early things like GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, but that was limited by the N64 controller. But before that, we still hadn't really figured out. You play Red Faction, which is a launch FPS on the PlayStation 2, and it was still using a single stick with a button to hold down to manually aim while not moving. So Halo was the one. They weren't the first people, I don't think, to do dual analog shooting, but they're the one that set the trend and really made it clear that oh, this is the way to do it
right
on this hardware.
Well, I was in denial because I had the PS2 at the time, and I was man, this Halo hype for Halo 1 is so there. I want a part of this action from the FPS aspect to the story. I'm Space Marines or whatever, not Warhammer, but like having the futuristic humanity fight aliens. It looks so cool.
Yeah.
And I tried going from game to game. Like I think it was like Time Split. I tried playing on
Time
PS2.
Splitters, yeah.
And I was like, it's not doing it for me. And my first big purchase was an Xbox. I got an Xbox and I got Halo. My buddy Robert and I played the hell out of it. Because that was back in the day where it's like games aren't as easily accessible as they are now. And like you got like a game or a few games and you played the hell out of them. You top to bottom. I remember Robert and I stumbled across an Easter egg randomly where I just like, it was like some tower on the 8th level and we climbed up on it with a banshee and we stood in this one spot and then the music stopped and some like piano music came in and we're like, whoa, we found an Easter egg. And then we like would role play like these two brothers were like, I can't live anymore, I can't take this world, and he'd jump and then kill himself and we'd, no. But I hope this, at least us nostalgia gushing, makes it clear that, and I'm sure many viewers feel the same way, Halo was a very important game, and it's not just the shooting aspect and the gameplay, but the story. The story was it felt like, okay, I've seen Star Wars with fantasy sci-fi with like space wizards, but this one felt a bit more like, and I'm sure folks are like, well, there's plenty of sci-fi out there. Okay, yeah, sure. But like to me, this is the first time where I'm like, wow, this feels like a human military in space. It's back against the wall, fighting an overwhelming force of aliens, and you have our lone Spartan who is like the ace up our sleeve and could save humanity. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I like that. The giant space battles and on this Halo ring, it all feels so new and crazy, and I love it. And then Halo 2 came out, and I'm like, they're on Earth? What? The graphics look so amazing. There's another Halo ring. Oh my god, who's the Arbiter? Like the Covenant can speak English? I don't know if I like that. They're the bad guys. And then only for me, like, wow, this is actually a very potent storytelling point of the elites realizing they've been betrayed. How the brutes have an ego problem. How the prophets are all lying to them. And then it all comes together in Halo 3 with like that final mission when you're on the Warthog with Arbiter, trying to get off of like the ARG. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
I love that because it's like, we gotta get out of here. It's like, oh my god, bring it back to the basics.
They know.
I'm like, chef's kiss, and then the after credits with "Wake me when you need me." Oh my fuck! This soldier won his war, so we thought, and he's like, I'm going back to sleep because I'm gonna wait till you need me again. And it's like, dude, what? So I gush to say how there's so much material to work with, and I remember waiting for, when will they do a Halo movie? When will they do a Halo series? And I think it's worth acknowledging that for the longest time, video games in general have been kind of ignored by Hollywood.
Right.
Where it's like no one really wanted to do that, for whether creative differences or just bias or whatever. But it's like, oh, there was the Mario movie. Oh, it's awful. An Angry Birds movie eventually came out, which was like kind of, I guess, the first unofficial step towards something that was competent.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like video games, back in the late 80s, early 90s, they were far less narrative driven just because of technical constraints.
Yeah.
So it's like when you're trying to make a film out of them, you have nothing really to guide you. It's like, how do you make a movie out of Mario?
Italian guys bring in
Chris Pratt, as Mario,
right, or John Leguizamo's, but it's changing.
Yeah,
and I think like
Halo was fertile grounds for offshoot material, which is why you had like the Forward Unto Dawn movie,
right?
You had Fall of Reach novels and Ghost of Onyx, and there was a lot of space in the mythos to really flesh out stuff.
Yeah.
And so the interesting thing is that, like you said, Halo was important. And that really is the operative word. Like, Halo is past its prime.
Yeah.
So many other games now are driving the industry forward just because the industry's changed. And in order for Halo to adapt and become more relevant again, it has to no longer be Halo.
Which is like that great divide of nostalgia versus adapting.
Yeah.
And yeah, like there've been like Halo Legends, the animated anthology series, and other little like series, but Halo, the series on Paramount Plus, seems to be the first authentic attempt to actually throw their weight behind it in a way where it's like, this is the story of Halo. Oh, by the way, it's an alternate universe.
Yeah, this feels like the first Halo project that's trying to be a tentpole product in and of itself,
Well
as
said.
opposed to just being a tie-in to the
Yeah.
games. And they put the money behind it. They put the time behind it because like this has gone through what, like 260 drafts in like 10 years and juggled between multiple people. This would have been a lot more timely if it had come out, you know, back when they announced it attached to Spielberg and shit.
Right. And I know that back in the day, there were rumors of Blomkamp, like Neil Blomkamp, the guy who did District 9, doing a Halo series or a movie.
That'd be a good
J.J.
fit.
Abrams, potentially. I'm not sure how valid those rumors
Yeah.
ended up being. Well, they didn't happen, so who can say? But this, it wasn't until recently that we started to see video games get adaptations that were competent. Castlevania was a very good one for Netflix, and it
Yeah.
seems that doing it through a series is the way to go. Gosh, now I'm drawing blanks. There was one recently that was also quite competent as far as like, man, don't chalk up that me saying there are examples versus me being stupid with being forgetful. I'll have to go through the list. But that sentiment of being like, hey, video game adaptations are kind of the thing now. They're starting to emerge. Like if they did a Samus, like a Metroid series, like I'd be here for it.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think the obvious one that you're probably referring to, Arcane, was
Thank you. I'm gonna say
masterful.
I'm forgetting a very good example, and
Arcane is a great example of like taking again a game with a lot of fertile ground for lore and exploring it.
ooh, and Halo did not do that.
Halo had the opportunity, and it's arguably would have been an easier task to adapt Halo just because like a lot of that characterization and lore is more front facing,
Mhm.
where like League is just run lanes and smash each other.
Right.
You know, it'd be like trying to make if Halo was just multiplayer and trying to extract like the tone and the lore of the series from that, it'd be a bit more obtuse because
Yeah.
like there's nothing forward facing. But you have a lot to work with in terms of like foundational storytelling in the original trilogy of games, and you know, even to a degree the stuff 343 did after the fact.
Oof,
But
we'll talk about 343 here in a bit, I suppose.
but they made some decisions with this adaptation that are interesting.
Right. And for full disclosure of people, we want to make sure that we balance our opinions. We don't want to become ranty, like, like
Right.
shaking our canes. Like we as we said at the start, like we wanted to be as open-minded as we could and leave our nostalgia at the door, which we did. But on the show's own merit, it failed.
It has a lot of problems, and that's why I said I think it's important to talk about it as an adaptation and as a product in and of itself, because those are two components of it. And I think there's a lot of like back and forth right now. I think the general consensus has been, if you're a fan of Halo, this is a disappointment. If you're not a fan of Halo, it's fine.
I disagree. I think I have a theory for that. We kind of touched based on it yesterday, but
Yeah.
like I've heard that, what you said, I've heard that before.
I think you can, and I think in this video we will make a case for the show being subpar, even disconnected from Halo as a franchise.
It's so easy for us to be like completely cynical to it and be like, there's no merit whatsoever. Because I mean, like, it's $10 million per episode. What, $200 million in total for the production?
It's a lot.
It's which I don't know how the math checks out, because I think it's only 9 episodes, but all I know is that there was some money thrown at this.
Right.
And also for full, let's be honest with ourselves, this is the first episode, but we still wanted to do this video because it's the first episode. Like, that's important. That's where we start.
Right.
And
This is your first impression of the project.
so let me just say real fast, to put a nice little bow on the video game adaptation discussion, is that we've seen, I think it's the streaming wars that will really bring game adaptations out of the shadows and into the limelight, because millennials are now adults and Zoomers are no strangers to video games. Now's the if you know what you're doing, which not everybody does, but it's like Zelda, Metroid, Arcane as of late. I wouldn't be surprised. And it's also, okay, let me finish this thought. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a massive upswing in video game adaptations this decade, and ones that are actually pretty damn good. That being said, video game adaptations are also riddled with development hell. Minecraft movie, the FNAF movie, the Halo series. It's like, I've never seen one except for like, well, Castlevania went well, Arcane went well. We're starting to see a lot more winners, but like more often than not, it seems like they stumble when it comes to doing these productions, from conception to execution. Game adaptations. I feel like Arcane's the first true bona fide like draw-dropping winner.
I think the reason Arcane does well, and I think why a lot of these projects don't or get trapped in development hell, is the motivation behind why they're being made. The obvious reason is money.
Of course.
And I think the reason why video game adaptations were ignored for the better part of like the early 2000s, and the ones that did get made were bad, is because games weren't doing Hollywood numbers in terms of revenue. Now they are. Now Hollywood's playing catch up. And it's like, well, we're riding their coattails now because, you know, Fortnite makes more money than any movie that comes out. It's just the way it is. So like, if you're a Hollywood exec and you don't care about the art and just the revenue, it's like, well, we need to adapt that because that's where the money is, as opposed, you know, the money isn't with Will Smith anymore. It's with, you know,
that's a slap to the face,
Steve Minecraft Man. So
yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's audiences change because audiences grow older, and with new audiences reaching different demographics, there could be opportunity. The question is, okay, whose hands are you putting this into?
That's the important question, because I think you look at something like the Minecraft movie and why it's never come out, because I don't think anybody, you know, at least at the high levels of production, cares about Minecraft other than a way to make money for the studio. Whereas, you know, Arcane was made by Studio 4-ish, which has done a ton of promotional material for Riot for years. I think, you know, they did the Jinx reveal trailer from all the way back that like set the internet on fire, and they've done a ton of other work for the property.
They've earned that.
Giving it to them, they clearly have a proven track record of taking even just tiny little snippets of that lore and expanding on it and really realizing it in a way that captivated people. And just listening to the developer interviews and stuff for the show, like they clearly were passionate about this project.
Passion's important, and more often than not, one can detect it.
Right.
So, yes, the Halo series went to production hell. It was thrown around. It seems like it was the reason why we are even seeing it right now is due to the opportunity created by the streaming wars, because it was going to be on Showtime. That was like, no, we're going to put it on Paramount Plus. It will be, as you said, a tentpole series, because all these streaming services who were late to the party are scrambling to try and find content to persuade viewers to go check them out. You have like Netflix, which is very well established, and of course Disney and Disney Plus. Paramount Plus is more at like on the outskirts of streaming services. Like they showed up later to the war, so now they're like, what do we have to do to get a piece of the action? Because if we don't get into it now, we're going to be left out of this new landscape of entertainment where the dominant players are currently fighting it out. So Halo, the Halo series, the one we've already wasted so much money on, let's try to make it work.
Yeah, we need to get it out at this point.
So they gave it to the show creators, the showrunners, Kyle Killen, who it's Killen, and Stephen Kane. And I looked at their filmographies respectively, and I say this to know, like, because it could be just a me thing, but I'm like, there's nothing on their filmography that really knocks my socks off, where I'm like, that makes sense. Like the first, I always get their name mixed up. The director for Dune, the movie that came out last year, Denis Villeneuve, I believe. His filmography with Arrival, like just seeing that movie alone, I was like, oh, you know what you're doing. You're very good at effects and building atmosphere and giving an alien setting. Of course, you know what you're doing with Dune. Like, you've proven that step by step. Versus these folks, where I'm like looking at their filmography and I'm like, you wrote for American Dad? Okay. Like, okay. Like, not to like take away from your accomplishments, but this feels like a very odd, like, I don't know, I was looking for someone who like has a built resume for like sci-fi or just something where it's like, oh yeah, I mean, I'd be real, I think J.J. Abrams directing it could do an excellent job, not writing for it, directing for it.
I agree. I mean, J.J. Abrams is a good director.
Yeah.
He's not a good writer, as we've learned multiple times, especially with another certain sci-fi franchise, which we not be named right now. But he's a good director. He's always been good with visuals and presentation and really kind of instilling that feeling of grandiose in what he does.
Yep.
You know, Star Trek 09 did that really well too.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I can see like a J.J. Abrams shot of like a Halo ring reveal
And that's
like
a
a
good
Halo property.
name to tie to your series.
You know?
I'd be like, JJ's working on this, directing it. That's it.
So, but I think the interesting thing is that like not to like jump ahead too much,
Of course.
but Halo looks pretty good. It sounds pretty good. But the thing that like Hollywood seems to be ignoring right now is writing. Every major bomb or just like disaster in Hollywood recently has been giving the writing to people who don't have the chops to pull off a script. And I think it's easy to forget about writing because it's not visual. So when you just look at a trailer, it's not there, you know?
I think we need to, and this is such a potential rabbit hole topic. So I'm going to try to make it very quick and be very succinct with what I'm trying to say here. Most audiences just want to watch the thing and then go home. Like, the folks who analyze film, the storytelling, are the minority compared to the financial aspect of an audience showing up.
Right.
And I'm not saying that to disrespect audiences, saying, oh, they're dumb, they just need to have the keys jangled in their face. No. But at the same time, a lot of these folks go there to decompress and relax.
Yeah.
And I think, you said this yesterday, it's the geezer teasers? You borrowed that term from regular media.
Which I think they also borrowed from another article. But it's the idea of just like getting movies direct to like Redbox or something from like a washed up or just like, you know, older actor that the name alone can sell it. Like Bruce Willis is the one that Red Letter Media was focusing on. But just in general, I think like for most people who consume media who aren't like glued to YouTube like we are, you get back from your 9 to 5, you're tired, you crack a beer, sit down on your couch, you throw on whatever streaming service you have. You probably pick a recommendation that either you heard from, you know, at the office that day or just whatever's recommended to you. And you just chill, get a little buzzed, watch a show. And that's the end of that. It's a way to just unwind after the day.
Right. And like a friend of mine, her father loved the Halo series, episode 1. And a friend of ours, Paleo's father, was like, yeah, I checked it out. I liked it. And it makes me scratch my head where I'm like, is that the audience they're going for? The ones that just want us to just turn their brains off and just watch, you know, a simple story. And I'm not saying, I mean, obviously it's episode 1, so there could be more to it. And I say simple. Like, okay, let me just, real fast, just maybe I'm retconning. There are movies that can be profound with their stories that still succeed financially.
Sure.
But when you look at films like the Transformer, like cinematic universe or whatever, and it's like, oh, that's just turn your brain off, have fun. And I know Marvel, like with their stuff, requires a bit more, you know, pay attention here. And I'm not saying it's like, you know, not worthy of giving it like props for good stories and characters, but even then, it's not like when my mom will go see a movie, like let's say my mom went to go see Dune. She'd be like, nah, I don't like this. This is just what's happening. I'm leaving. All right. But she'll watch something like, well, maybe my mom's a poor example. What I'm saying is there are viewers who just want to watch and be entertained and not really think about it.
Right.
Because there are folks who watch those A24 films versus folks who are like, I just want to watch like Minions too. and that's fine. There are different audiences, demographics. But I guess that's where we kind of, and forgive me, this is my ADD brain going all over the place, to bring it back in. For the Halo series, you have to keep in mind that a good chunk of the fandom, if not all of it, are very attached to the story from a nostalgic point of view. And also the story on its own is very good. Like Halo 1 through 3 and the expanded universe around it with like the books, it is so well done. Future humanity, okay. We're not like some fantasy Millennium Falcon Rebel Alliance, nor are we some totalitarian, Starship Troopers, though I'd say it's more of that than Star Wars. It is just humanity spacefaring race going about, expanding. Oh, there's some insurrectionists, the rebels.
Yeah, they're insurrectionists, insurgents, the same deal.
Splintered groups who went
Yeah.
away from the UNSC. And there's a bit of a buildup to like, okay, like the UNSC deploys the Spartans to go take care of these rebels, and then the Covenant show up and just flip the table, and that's the story. We take it from there, and that's enough. That was enough to hook me in and follow in the footsteps of John Spartan and see where we go. And now that we're 25 minutes into the video,
let's talk about the actual show.
Episode,
Yeah,
and how they took liberties, and we have opinions.
Yeah, so I think it's important to start from the beginning with, this is the silver timeline. So the showrunners said that they are creating an alternate universe for this show, which I respect.
I do too.
Because as much as I would like to see this also be a companion piece to the Halo that I know, we've seen what happens when you don't do that with Star Wars.
Right.
Because they completely just like they retconned all the expanded universe and made that all bullshit so they could continue with the sequel trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of uproar because of that. And they didn't pay a lot of attention to the world building in general. So by being able to just blank slate it with like, this is a different timeline, this is a different Master Chief, this is a different UNSC. So like the changes we're making here, they're not inflicting any damage onto your games.
Which is kind of a smart way to potentially disarm the fandom who grew up with the game.
Right.
Where it's like, okay, this isn't my precious trilogy or series. It's based on it, but it'll be different. So also, what are they going to do?
Right. It asks an interesting question in terms of like, okay, what they're going to do. But then on the same time, it asks another question. Why did you want to adapt Halo then?
Right.
Because like the whole point of doing an adaptation is to take what people like and expand on it, or do something, fresh and unique with these characters, with these settings, with these locations.
Well, I'll tell you, because I brought this up to you and Laura, and maybe this could be a poor example, and if it is, shoot me down right now. Just literally pull the UNSC assault rifle, the one that John Spartan threw on the ground. Did you see that tweet where they showed the video clip of like the gun falling on the ground? And how poorly animated it was, and how like unnecessary it was. Where they're like, "Why'd you have to animate that?" And the physics of the gun hitting the ground didn't even make sense.
Oh, in the opening scene,
yeah,
when he drops the assault rifle,
right?
It did look very jarring. I didn't know it became a thing, but even then, I was like, "Did they need to use a seat? Like, why not just drop a prop?"
They didn't even need to show that.
And they didn't need to show it either.
But so sorry, tangent. This might be a weird example. So again, shoot me down if it's a bad one. But I think about these live action adaptations for animated movies. And I'm like, okay, why? Like, what are you adding? And one can make the argument, oh, well, we're covering parts of the story, like for Maleficent, that they wouldn't have done they did not do in the Sleeping Beauty original, or we're talking about Jungle Book and how it's darker in the Disney 2016 version or whatever. And it's like, okay, these feel more like excuses. Because the primary reason why you're doing it is for fucking money.
Right.
And also because audiences, and I'll be honest, they have majority of audience of viewers don't have much respect for animation. And they'll go, because I remember like my mom's friend was like, I didn't like the old Jungle Book, but this new one was better. I almost wanted to slap the friend where I'm like, get that movie out of your mouth. Sorry, that was topical humor. But yeah, it's almost like audiences are like, it's live action, therefore it's better and serious and more competent and mature. And it's like, no, it's a cheap tactic to make you go see a movie that on a technical level, I've never anything. It's the artists who do this stuff. Like the artists who did the Lion King remake, like amazing work.
They're trying to get paid.
Right. And you did some great stuff. It's the writers and the directors and the folks at Disney who greenlit it, where I'm like, why? Oh, of course. Money. It's money. And I feel like for this Halo series, it's like, okay, do you have a burning passion to tell a story? Why did you recreate it? What is your motive? And I know you said it's money, but I'm going back to it again. It's always money.
Right.
And then after that comes excuses. Like, yeah, there are exceptions where it's like, oh, this is a cool remake that worked out because you actually had a story to tell. it was in the hands of someone who knew what they were doing versus those who were, it's like an assignment. All right, who's taking Disney animated live action adaptation number 79? All right, you take it. It's almost like a work order and not an actual like vision. And I feel like for Halo here, it kind of falls in the same ballpark where they're like, we need something. Halo, just make it work.
Right, because you have a streaming service that's desperate for content. You have a franchise that's very recognizable. You put 2 and 2 together. It's like, okay, this is what we need to do. And I think the interesting thing is that the Silver timeline is an interesting idea for letting them have a bit more creative flexibility.
Yeah.
But the creators of the show also said that they purposely didn't reference the games at all. They've never played the games. They don't know. They just looked at like general information. And that seems like a red flag to me.
It's insanely ignorant, because I know it's quick for us to be like, oh, you have no respect for the fans or the original property. And I can see the argument made where it's like, no, we wanted to go in there not with bias, like information, and we want to do our own story. Just give us the bullet points and we'll go from there. But to me, it's like, okay, but if you are a writer, wouldn't you want more information just to know what other folks have already done?
Not only that, but all that does is tell me, well, then you're not fans of Halo.
Right.
So why should I trust you with the property?
Yeah, it's like disrespectful. I know, I said it's initially, it's like disrespectful. But I'll say it, but I will actually back that up. I think it's disrespectful. And I think it's poor craftsmanship.
Yeah, I think even if you had no intention of telling that same story or using that same continuity, knowing what it is, if for no other reason, will prevent you from like accidentally lifting a story beat or a character motivation and like think like you're doing something creative when you're just like rehashing something.
Mm-hmm.
You just having the context, there is no downside to it other than you had to play a video game and you've probably never done that before.
Well, it's good for checks and balances too, because for all we know, because I think we have a soft theory, and it could be completely debunked. So I like to think that they at least would I would hope that they have 2 brain cells rubbed together to go, at least, we need a Halo lore expert to at least vibe check us, just in case.
I would hope they would be talking to 343 throughout this. I'm assuming they would have to.
Please. Because, like, what if they're like, man, I wish we had a black character in our series. Oh, well, we didn't play the game, so we don't have one. Make Captain Keyes black. And it's like, wait, hold on. And I'm not saying that's the case. I'm not. But though, we'll see
it's hard not to draw that conclusion based on what you know.
Right. Because I have no issue whatsoever. Because the UNSC is a timeline where humanity is taking every single resource and person it has to throw at this machine that's winning. So, like, a spacefaring race being Star Trek or Starship Troopers, which I know is a weird example, but it's true. Because at that point you see it's humanity versus something else. I know the Federation for Star Trek is more humanity united out of science and philosophy and the betterment of mankind, versus Starship Troopers or the UNSC, where it's like, no, we have to do this
it's a
or we die.
Yeah.
And I know there's context, but like Captain Keyes being black, that's fine. All right. Miranda being like, though my issue with the Miranda thing is like, and maybe folks in the comments can enlighten me. I read, spoilers by the way, for those who don't know. So Miranda's the daughter of Dr. Halsey. And I remember reading back in the day somewhere that Halsey and Keyes had a fling, but that was it. And I never assumed that Miranda was the daughter of Halsey. But in the show, they're like, Captain Keyes is like, yeah, your mother's crazy, you know, she's just that weirdo.
Right, she's focused on work. She reminds me a lot of you. He's like, thanks, Dad. He's like, no, I meant that as a compliment.
Right, yeah. And that to me was like, wait, hold on, like, is Halsey's confirmed mom? No. Because to me, Halsey was never... But I feel like the character of Halsey, and I could be wrong, and maybe folks are like, no, that's what happened. And okay, I'll eat crow. But like, Halsey is married to her job. Maybe she bangs somebody for fun to decompress, or ulterior motive of like, I want to get in Captain Keyes' pants so I can see what the UNSC like high commander up to. Because like you mentioned before, outside of this episode, outside of this conversation right now, is that Halsey and the Spartans are like a begrudgingly accepted into the UNSC, where they're like, we need them. Checks and balances, because these guys, they're not really in suit. and they're doing some really iffy things, and we're kind of like we're cautious. We're actually a little bit scared, but all at the same time we're still fighting the same enemy here.
There's always been friction between Halsey and the Spartans and the general UNSC.
Right, and that is something that I can see why Halsey would maybe play with Keyes just to get inside the head of a high command ranking officer in the UNSC. So I digress. Let me hit up some bullet points, and then let's work our way from the start. Okay, so it starts off with some rebels on a planet called Madrigal, which I never even heard of that one before. Probably alternate universe, and
Which is fine.
It's like a bunch of monitors and a bar with the resurrection, the rebels who are like, the more UNSC propaganda, and also I doubt our leaders can talk and have peace talks with the UNSC. Those Spartans, though, man, those Spartans will kick your ass. I fought Marines. I've never, no one gets away from a Spartan. They're crazy. And then the kid, there's one main girl who's like the daughter of like the leader of this camp of rebels. They're mining stuff. And they go out, these kids with that girl go out into the forest. They see a cave. The cave is like lighting up. There's a Covenant drop ship over the mountain that's over the cave. And then all hell breaks loose. And I gotta give props. I do appreciate the show putting their pedal to the metal with the gore.
Yeah, it's definitely more violent than the Halo games. Like, someone made a good comparison. Like, it feels like a Gears action scene, like Gears of War. Because like it's pretty brutal. Like, you get hit with a plasma pistol in Halo, it's like, oh no, 10% of my shields are gone. You get hit with a plasma pistol in this show, your legs explode.
Yeah, there are people getting like cut in half.
It's very violent.
They set the tone quickly where it's like, and that's where me going into the show, trying to keep an open mind. Initially, I'm like, okay. Like, the Covenant take no prisoners. This is fine. They're killing children. Right. That really highlights the genocidal nature of the Covenant. Kill them all. This is a holy war. We know that going into it.
Right.
Though, I guess as a brand new viewer, we don't know that yet.
You just know that these are scary alien monsters, and they will mercilessly gun down a bunch of like people hiding in a like bomb shelter.
People who doubted the existence of it.
Right. There's like an off-thrown line from like one of the characters that like, I thought these guys were just UNSC propaganda. So it's like establishing that there are three main factions in the show so far, at least from episode 1. There's the Covenant, there's a UNSC, and then there's this insurgent force, which seems to be just like anybody who's not playing by the UNSC's rules, right? The girl wants independence from the UNSC on this planet or whatever. That's like her motivation throughout most of the episode. So obviously the Covenant hates humanity. They don't care about the differentiation between the UNSC and these insurgent forces. They're all humans. They all need to be fucking off.
Though, and that leads to another point, and I'll get to here in a second. And I'll say it now, and we'll revisit it. There's a human in the Covenant, and that was a bit of a head turner.
Not only is there a human in the Covenant, there's a human in the Covenant who's like having talks with Mercy, and like seems like she's above his pay grade. Like, she's Mercy's talking like, down to Mercy.
Like, I'm sorry to interrupt you during your space opera. Like, something, I didn't talk to you. That was a bit of a twist, and
it could be interesting.
It could be, that's right.
But my gut reaction, because they do the same thing with Master Chief at the end of the show, is that they feel like general audiences need a human face. They're not going to be able to sympathize with something that doesn't have a human face.
Right, which I think is that's them being they're pussying out.
Yeah, I think you're underestimating your audience significantly.
Because the Arbiter, I'm very like I have a lot of sympathy for him, where it's like being brainwashed. And I know that the show hasn't gotten to this point about the Covenant or what they're even doing. Like, right. I felt like there was a lot of like, oh, it's a Spartans and the UNSC propaganda, and then aliens showed up, and also John Spartan killed my mom, and John Spartan touched the Forerunner artifact and made him think back to his childhood.
Let's before we even go any further, let's kind of do like a quick run through of what this episode is.
Go ahead.
The episode starts with this insurgent group, and we're introduced to our POV character. I forget what her name is. I should have looked it up. I'm an idiot. But she's this young girl who's the daughter of the leader of this insurgents group. And we're shown the beginning of the story through her perspective. She wants to get off this rock. She's a nobody on this backwater planet.
Doing some drugs.
Very, Luke Skywalker Tatooine kind of premise. She's hanging out with her friends, and then the Covenant attack destroys everything she's ever known. Her family dies, her friends die, the encampment is destroyed.
Father gone.
Yeah, everyone gets murdered. And right as everyone's about to lose everything, a Pelican comes in, Master Chief and Silver Team, his team of 3 other Spartans in this continuity, drop in and fucking clean house. It's a really fun action scene, other than a couple, little missteps here and there.
Bunch of elites are the main presence.
Yeah, there's
the only presence, and they look very beefy. They look well done, but these elites are like, they're buff.
Yeah. And the thing we were talking about is I think because the show has been in development hell for so long, and obviously they've been working with 343, this very much feels like the 343 interpretation of the elites from Halo 4 and 5, which were bulkier, had bigger armor, and were just aesthetically different than the Bungie ones. It feels weird now because with Halo Infinite, they're walking it back and they're trying to emulate Bungie's aesthetic more. So this feels a little bit disconnected, but comparing the way the elites look in the show versus Halo 5, they're very similar. But regardless, Spartans clean house, just kill all the elites. And then they just leave, and they leave this girl by herself, because it's kind of just show they're very, militaristic, cold, calculating.
Statistics.
They're here to fight, and that's it. They're not people. They're here just to be weapons, and that's how the insurgents view them. They're terrifying, unstoppable. They're worth 100 Marines. They're a Spartan. You can't argue with them. You can't do anything. They'll just fucking murder you. So they leave and they go try and find the dropship that the girl saw earlier. The other 3 Spartans go off screen to take care of the ship, clear it, and bring it back to Reach. Whereas Chief, alone, for whatever reason, he insists he goes alone for no particular reason. He goes into this cave.
There was one other Spartan who went with him. It was I think it was the girl Spartan. She was like,
oh, right.
John, what's wrong?
They go in together, but he tells them to leave him after the fact.
After the fact.
So they go in and they find this Forerunner artifact, assumedly a Forerunner artifact.
Has to be.
I mean, I don't know what else it could be. But the Covenant were excavating this ruin site on this planet, and they found a Forerunner artifact. And Chief touches it, and it lights up, and he gets kind of a flashback.
A brain blast.
A brain blast. It's very Prothean Beacon from Mass Effect 1, if anyone's played that. Which is a strange thing to be close to when you're making a Halo game, or Halo show. So after that, the other 3 Spartans take the dropship and leave, and he stays with the girl because the girl happens to run into them again. I guess if you have nothing left and that's what you saw that started this whole problem, you would want to investigate it. So I don't particularly blame her for showing up again, but it was really funny when a cloaked elite just knocks her out of the way.
She had a really bad day.
Yeah, a really bad day. So Chief takes her and leaves on the Pelican.
Which, small gripe, Pelicans, I know they can go into space in the Halo universe and go in orbit, but I always was under the impression that you would need a larger ship to get you from planet to planet.
I mean, the whole plot of Halo Infinite revolves around that.
Pelican was stranded.
The Pelican was stranded. He couldn't leave the ring. So whatever, that's fine. The alternate timeline,
the autopilot,
the Silver timeline has fully functioning interspace traveling.
You don't
Pelicans.
need Fohammer anymore. It's a Tesla Pelican.
Yeah. So that's fine. I'm willing to hand wave that away. That's not super important.
Right.
The important part is Chief takes the girl and brings them back to Reach. And so for the entire rest of the episode, Chief is just on this Pelican with the girl.
And we catch some, of course, the interaction. Well, we'll get it with the Covenant and Mercy, whatever, with this other human who's gone AWOL, as far as we know. But yes, as far as John goes, and this girl, back and forth, she's like, I'm hungry. Okay. She's like, do you eat? And you go, I eat nuts and bolts. It's a joke. I actually kind of like that, just a little bit. But she's like, you killed my father, or my mother, you monster. And then Miranda has a hologram that's like, we need your help. We need you to convince the other human colonies that this is a real threat.
Right.
You can be a good spokesperson because this is a real problem. And only to her to be like, oh, well, you UNSC are the monsters. And Miranda being taken back by that. And she's like, wait, they're gonna kill the girl, because the UNSC is like, kill this girl. Like we can't let her get out.
So Miranda appears as like a hologram in the ship and is starting talking to this insurgent girl, and she's like, "Look, your entire family and entire like installation was just destroyed by the Covenant. You know the Covenant's real. Your people don't really believe our propaganda. Obviously, we've been at odds for a while, but this is a bigger threat than any of us alone can handle. If you were able to like come back to Reach, talk with us and help us communicate to the rest of your people, everyone who's not aligned with the UNSC, that like there's a bigger force. It's not propaganda. It's real. That would be super helpful, because then we can all kind of, at least temporarily, band together, deal with this alien threat that we don't know anything about, and stop this infighting between us that's only going to make us all weaker." Seems pretty reasonable. She outright refuses and threatens to lie to everyone and say that everyone was murdered by the UNSC, not the Covenant. Which, I understand having a chip on your shoulder for the faction because they killed your mom, but the Covenant just killed everyone else you've ever known.
Also, you're talking to a child who just lost her everything that day. Maybe now is not the best time to press this on her.
Right.
But at the same time, and one of the greatest sins of this episode is how insanely quick-paced everything is.
Yeah, we've taken more time to talk about the plot than the show does.
Right.
Everything moves really quickly.
Far too much.
I think we've said it multiple times just discussing about this privately. There's like half to an entire season's worth of plot progression in this one episode.
The first 20 minutes or so with action, fine. Okay? Introducing Halsey, the UNSC High Command, well, it was just one admiral, Reach, Keyes, Miranda, John, and the other Spartans. Okay, fine. That's fine. But then it all went way too quick when John went AWOL. Where... Yeah,
that's the weird thing, is that...
It was way too fast.
By the end of the episode, this girl that Chief has never met before right now convinces him to go against the UNSC and Dr. Halsey.
And this is due to... There's this... When John touched the Forerunner artifact, it brought back memories of...
his childhood.
Right. Because for those who don't know, Spartans are kidnapped by the Spartan program and then are trained to be these soldiers with no free will, essentially. And John's like, Halsey, I had memories. It was a little boy and a dog. And then, because that, again, the entire...
They go out of their way to make Halsey and her assistant visibly nervous about John remembering his past.
So they're working this angle, because in the original story, these kids were kidnapped.
And
they know.
They remember that they used to have families, and it's kind of just conditioned out of them through training to
Either
be like, there's something more important going on, and this is your life now.
This is your life, and if you don't want it, you're dead.
Which is like the emotional crux of the interesting nature of the Spartans, being like, they know that they're human, but they have to act subhuman almost. They're equipment.
But at the same time, you're fighting for humanity, and they're not soulless machines.
Right.
But they really do. And here's the thing that makes me the most, I guess, just upset. There is potential for this story of the UNSC not being ethical with how they conducted themselves with the Spartan program, what Halsey did, sacrificing maybe a city of 1 million to save a planet of 10 billion or something. But they didn't earn that, that topic in the show. They fast-tracked it. Not yet. It's like, if you want to talk about the UNSC isn't some bastion of goodness, which it never was, then do it. But you have to earn it.
You have to set up a plot.
Yeah.
This is like I don't want to say it's a twist, because you have had nothing to twist yet. It's just like you're coming out of the gates with every faction is evil. The Covenant is bad, but the UNSC is just as bad. They're going to murder this little girl in cold blood because she's not going to play ball with our propaganda plan. And the UNSC traditionally, when talking about this as an adaptation, was never characterized as this ethically compromised. There was clearly...
It wasn't the Empire.
Right. There was clearly elements that were less than above board. But like, because Master Chief was the protagonist of these games and you play as Master Chief, you want the UNSC to generally be seen as a positive force with issues.
Well, this show, the game presented it where it's like, the only thing you need to know, and this is a fact, is that the Covenant want all of humanity dead.
Right.
So for the rest of humanity, I guess we got something in common. We got to fight or we die. So in the hands of a military like government like the UNSC, then it's like, no, I see you're coming from. You're fighting for self-preservation itself. I can get behind that, and we can figure out the details in the aftermath later.
The games didn't have time to examine these kinds of ethical questions of like, what are the ramifications of long-term martial law?
Earth was literally invaded and almost lost.
So like
that can't be overstated enough.
These are interesting questions to ask about the UNSC. The problem is this show asks them right out the gate before you even know who the NSC are.
They never said what UNSC stands for. We don't know why the Covenant are fighting. We don't know. Okay, another small gripe, because I feel like small gripes are valid, not in a broad sense, but more of a mark of craftsmanship, where they're like, oh no, John Spartan is in the Pelican with this girl, and we can't disable it properly because we turn off the oxygen, and he knows, and he's breaking through atmospheric reach, and now he's coming towards his base through autopilot, and it's like, where's the naval fleet at Reach, the most heavily armed, like outside of Earth base in humanity, and yet we saw no outer, like saw no orbital, like.
The last 25 minutes are just nonstop things happening, and then thing happens, and none of it, like a normal show, I feel, would have, like, everything that happens at the later end of the show feels like it should have an episode or two examining the consequences between it. Like, John should realize the UNSC are keeping, like, Halsey's keeping things from me, and you should have some time to like ruminate on that fact. And then next, it's like, oh, you know, this girl's actually good, and you have some time to ruminate on that. And then like, I need to distance myself from the UNSC, and there's some time to ruminate on that. Like, you realize the UNSC, they're not all good, and then you have some time to ruminate on that.
Let him
and
be a soldier for a second.
The end of the season is like, I'm going to defect, but instead this all happens within 5 minutes of each other.
It's like, okay, so and maybe the show creators are like, oh man, we need a rebel. You know, we don't want a yes man soldier. That's boring. He's a blank slate, which I think is stupid. It's not true. It's like they're like, we need, well, and I imagine they'll try to tell more of the story with John going from planet to planet, trying to go off on his own to figure things out. But for John, a soldier who's been essentially brainwashed as far as the show's concerned up to this point, to not even take an entire episode to show you how he's stuck in the wheels and the mechanisms of the UNSC,
Right.
to break ranks immediately because some girls like, oh yeah, you guys are the bad ones.
Their conditioning didn't take very well, if
No.
that's the case.
And I just,
There was no, they because like the episode ends with Chief taking off his helmet.
not even earned.
Generic white man number 7,483, but fine. it's not a huge deal. But like, it feels like this is supposed to be the moment, like John takes his helmet off, and this is him, like, representing him, like getting back in touch with his humanity, right? With helmet on, he's 117. Helmet off, he's John. And
Wasn't earned.
we don't even know who either of those sides of his character are yet.
No setup.
He's shot a gun a few times and made a bad joke. That's all he's done this entire episode, and you're already getting to this point.
Right.
You need some time for this to like percolate for a bit.
Let it burn and give us some setup, and then knock it down,
Right.
if you want to.
So you can't have this like triumphant moment of John realizing that he's more than just a soldier if we don't ever see him like struggling with that. That makes that decision have impact.
let him go to a
All we know is
compound.
that here's a guy who took off his helmet.
Right. It would have been so much more impactful if, like, there was another battle and you see how the UNSC are just scorched earth and other humans are getting killed in the process, like,
Right.
because they're in the way. Then John could be like, this isn't right. and then you can show that the UNSC, they're the ones who are pulling the strings. That feels more real to me versus, oh no, robot guy, white man is off the grid and somehow was able to rewire an automated.
It's very strange that
Pelican?
there's just like a nice glowy knob behind some grates that instantly lets you undo the autopilot.
Absolutely.
Very convenient.
Cortana might be an egg, you know?
Oh god, we haven't even talked about the egg person yet.
Yeah, they're like, Halsey's in her laboratory, and one of the like admirals from the UNSC was like, I told you to stop this program, and there's like a human in an egg, and we're like, oh no, is that Cortana?
There's a featureless like human in the fetal position in some weird like cryo egg thing. And I'm just like, if that's Cortana and she's like a cyborg robo android synthetic person,
Well, apparently the voice of Cortana from the games, it will be in the show as Cortana. What gives me a shred of like optimism. But then I'm like, why'd you not have Steve Downes and just keep the helmet on?
Because again, just like with having a human face for the Covenant, I feel like they feel general audiences need someone to emote.
But what about the go-to example, The Mandalorian?
Of course. That's the whole thing, right? It's very interesting. Like, again, I think this show thinks less of its audience.
We need a baby grunt to hang out with.
That's what they're going to bring in, Baby Grunt. Oh, this is the best show ever. I take it all back.
Hunter, little worms. Okay, a couple of positives, and then we can do a conclusion here. I liked some of the action at the start. It's not perfect. As Tom, as you said, and Laura also said earlier, outside of the podcast here, or the episode here, like the Spartans and their outfits look very well done.
Yes.
Though I feel like sometimes the lighting is a bit, they could do a better job of trying to create immersion. Where I look at some of the action scenes and the sets, I'm like, they feel too sterile to me. Feels like it is a set. I don't know. I watched the trailer for the Halo Reach trailer and seeing like one of the Spartan 6 like characters run with a bomb and all the action. I'm like, wow, this looks great. And I know that there's like computer animation and not just, and for all I know, maybe it all was computer animation, but I could have sworn I saw some actual human, actors. Same thing with the ODST trailer, which I know had human like actors in it doing like drop pods and whatever. I'm like, that felt so much more gritty and real to me. While the first action scene here for the Halo series, I'm like, it's they're competent people working on this, but it still feels hollow to me. There's something about it where I'm like, I'm not sure if it's the lighting or what, but it's not blending and it feels like I'm watching a very well-made like YouTube video from like some very good like
an incredibly well-done fan film.
Right. And
it's strange that they're spending this much money and you still feel like there's some cut corners here.
Right. Because that's the thing is when you see that much money's being involved, like then there's no excuses outside of bad execution. And I don't put it on the technical, like the people who made the models for the elites or the set designs, they're fine. Like the elites are great. Mercy looks great. Mercy looks phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like the
really,
model for
really
Mercy is like, wow, whoa. Like watching him moving his head around with those little dangly parts, and
which is why I don't understand why they needed a human, because like that model emotes. Like you could have him just like be on high chariot and be like, yo, fuck.
It's John Spartan's long lost sister, who's
you know what? I can see them doing that.
Jane,
big cringe if true.
Jane Covey. And I guess like there's some moments where for a show where the creators said we didn't play the games, they have no problem showing you a first-person perspective.
Yeah.
With the helmet and the boop, 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 which I like that. But at the same time, I'm like, who are you tipping the hat to?
It was cute, but at the same time, I was just like, remember Doom with the rock? That's all I thought of doing it. Yeah, so I don't know if that's really the first thing they want to come to mind. It's also interesting that like...
The video games that we didn't play.
In that first scene, Chief's HUD is yellow, and when he's on the ship, his HUD's blue. They change his color.
I don't know.
Which, I mean, it's not a huge deal, but it's very, I don't know.
They had guns and sound effects that were
pulled from the games.
When
his shields go down, you hear the iconic shield go down sound. Yeah, so
the elites with their shields, their plasma rifles.
There was once. Yeah. Thank God.
I mean, so here's the thing, is that the show is not completely forsaken. But as of right now, strictly on storytelling, like chops alone, they've already screwed up, and I'm concerned.
It's not the worst thing ever. It's like a very competent 5.
Right. Yeah. And I hope. And here's the thing: there's plenty of episodes left that could potentially sway us.
Absolutely.
But for what it is right now, from folks who play the games and know the story and the lore, at least enough, it doesn't bolster our confidence, but it doesn't obliterate it completely either.
It's a very confusing adaptation, but it's also a very rushed, self-contained story that's just trying to sprint to the finish line. And maybe that's just because they need to get this part out of the way so they can really take their time with the rest of the story. But as of right now, it's very concerning.
Well, I guess that's that. We'll have to see what episode 2 brings. Folks, do you want to see another review for the next episode?
We were considering either doing an episode by episode breakdown, like old men who are sad that their childhood's being ruined,
right?
Or we might just come back once the finale's done and just do a whole season recap. Let us know in the comments what you'd prefer.
We'd love to know what y'all think of the show as well. And,
Absolutely.
And yeah, that's I think that's a wrap for today on this video for Halo. Wake me when you need me.
Like, comment, and subscribe.